Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series, where I give my notes and thoughts and etc. on running my intrepid party of adventurers at my friendly local game stores through Out of the Abyss, the 5th edition Underdark adventure. So, yeah, I've been gone for a few weeks, and I'll address that during viewer feedback, but it's good to be back. And I fully intend to keep going with this series. So hang in there. If there's ever breaks like this, I don't foresee another one anytime in the near future. Also want to make sure everybody knows that I do have a copy of Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and I will be putting up a review on that within the next few days. Normally I would have already had it done by now, but again, the same thing that has kind of delayed this video, the next installment of Out of the Abyss, is also, kind of slowed that down, but it's all coming. You could very possibly see it before Thanksgiving, or by Thanksgiving weekend at the latest would be my guess. So anyway, all right, let's get right into it. If you're a new viewer, what I do here is this is not a actual play. It's not a recording of an actual session. Each week I give my thoughts, notes, tips, and etc. based on what happened in the previous session as I DM'd my party through Out of the Abyss. So if you're a returning viewer, thank you. If you're a new viewer, I hope you find benefit here. I also talk about just sort of dungeon master tips and thoughts in general. I try to be pretty transparent on both the good stuff and the bad stuff that I do, so you can learn from that, hopefully. But also sometimes we get into D&D rules clarifications or just RPG stuff in general. So let's get right into it. Let me put my handy dandy book down, and let's dig into viewer feedback. So I'm going to put on my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback here, and away we shall go. And I have to say that it's been so long. It's been like a month or something since I recorded, and like I feel like I'm having to teach myself how to do this all over again. So hopefully hopefully I will reward your time for watching. So here's the comments. Here's the viewer comments from 58, video 58. Vicky Stegan said, "Great vid as always, Shane. Keep doing what you're doing." I appreciate it, Vicky. I really enjoy doing it. And a question for you: what is your plan after Out of the Abyss, and are you planning on doing more notes for another book? Absolutely. As long as there keeps being interest in this video series, I'll do it. If there's not a lot of interest, I probably won't keep it up if it ever gets to the point where hardly anybody's watching it, simply because by the time I do my D&D session, take my notes, record, edit, all that, get it out there, promote it. I mean, it takes a significant amount of time. Several hours, believe it or not, for an hour or less video. So, but as long as, I'm getting a consistent viewership, and we're running at 100 plus people who seem to check this out every time one drops, I'll do it. Cause I've gotten so much feedback that people are getting benefit from it. So, and for my next one, I was thinking about, originally I figured I'd do Storm King's Thunder, because I really liked the adventure and it felt kind of, I don't know, crunchy old school kind of D&D adventure. But I'm really impressed with Tome of Annihilation. So unless something changes between now and whenever we finish Out of the Abyss in the next few months, I'll probably do Tome of Annihilation next. So there you go. And it's possible, like we did with White Plume Mountain, if I do a kind of a side adventure, I'll probably try to do notes on that as well, because White Plume Mountain was also popular. So, all right, Rob Plummer said, "Hey Shane, I handle enlarge the same way. I push the characters and NPCs out of the way of the enlarged creature. I don't give any penalty for this though. However, I've read somewhere when a creature does enlarge, they just fill the space provided, not any more than that." Yeah, so what... In the previous video, I had some Duergar enlarge, and because when you enlarge, you go from medium to large, and you take up 4 squares instead of 1. And I was like, well, so if there's other characters around that would be in one of those 4 spaces, do they push them out of the way? And the spell description for enlarge says, as Rob's pointing out, that they only fill the space provided, and not any more than that. but it doesn't really say anything about stuff that could be pushed, and a character could be pushed, right? Or, you know, like something not anchored to the ground that's relatively lightweight could be pushed. So I ruled, just kind of on the cuff, I was like, well, you know, you get pushed out of the way and now you have a large duergar there. Somebody else might rule differently. That's fine. But what, you know, what the spell definitely says is they only fill the space provided. So, you know, if they're like a 4-foot creature and the ceiling's only 6 foot, they're only going to enlarge up to 6 feet. And does that take them beyond medium? You'll have to kind of interpret at the time. I guess technically they could lay prone and then enlarge, so they're bigger. So maybe they get some strength bonuses or something like that. Again, that would be, you know, dependent on the DM call at the time and the situation. And so, you know, I kind of responded to Rob and said, there's a little bit of room to interpret there, it seems like. And he said, yeah, it's a DM's judgment call. And Rob said, personally, with it being a magical ability, I would say no, the creature is pushed back by a magical force that it can't resist. That's kind of where I'm at. I mean, this is a magic, you know, it's like the Hulk. If you're standing next to the Hulk and the Hulk's like, and gets all big, you're going to get pushed. Unless you're actively, you know, like, I want to resist this. And I guess maybe you could get into some weird situation where you have characters pushing against the enlarged creature to try to keep it from, and then you get into a DC strength check or something. I don't know. Just had that thought. So anyway, Rob, thanks for the question. Kyle Hunt said, running my players through Mantle Dareth now. By the way, personally, I thought Mantle Dareth was a pretty fun part of Out of the Abyss. He says, thanks for the post. The only person I've found that has been summarizing the entire campaign, Out of the Abyss campaign, and I appreciate it a lot. And, you know, you're welcome, Kyle. Glad it's helpful. Like I said earlier, it's one of the reasons why I do this video series, you know, because people are getting a lot of benefit from it, and that feels good to help other people out. So, and as for summarizing Out of the Abyss, you know, if people are looking for resources, one, again, check out Elven Tower. I've linked to them before. They have a great breakdown of Out of the Abyss, and they have a PDF that's, you know, really reasonably priced, just a few dollars, on the DM's Guild that has all kinds of tips and helpful stuff for Out of the Abyss, and it's helped me, and I've shared that with others. So that's a pretty good summary. And then there's a Out of the Abyss DM Facebook group or something like that I've joined, and there's a lot of good information there. So I would recommend that for people who are, you know, looking for this kind of information. And then finally, had another question from Rob Plummer. Thank you, Rob, for checking in on me. He checked in on me about 4 days ago. He said, hey, I hope everything's okay, Shane. Haven't had an update in a while. And so, yeah, I said, everything's fine. Thanks for checking. Said life and work kept me from DMing for 3 weeks. But we played this past week. And so now here's a video. So basically, I got sucked into a life plus work vortex. And I knew the work thing was coming because I knew for up to 2 weeks we were going to be like in a very intense, you know, 24-hour round the clock, 12-hour shift thing going on. And I knew that was going to be for up to 2 weeks. But the week or two before that actually got kind of crazy with a little bit of life stuff, but also work. There was 1 week, I canceled the game because I was like, you know, I knew that I wasn't going to DM on Halloween because I wanted to, we play on Tuesday nights, and I wanted to spend Halloween with my family before getting into this 2 week work vortex. So I knew that Halloween, the 31st, and then November 7th, I think, were 6th or 7th were going to be, you know, I wasn't going to be there. So I knew that was at least 2 weeks. But I got, you know, interim DMs. One of my players ran Death House from the little intro adventure to Curse of Strahd, and they had some fun with that. You know, don't be afraid to let somebody else run a temporary game while you're gone if you're a DM, rather than just outright canceling, because that keeps the flow of the game going and it keeps everybody showing up, keeps the energy going. So I prefer to do that if I know that something's coming, over just canceling and saying, hey, we're not going to have a game for 2 weeks. Now, every now and then I'll do that. I'll say, hey guys, let's just take a week off or whatever. But usually we try to keep going. The other thing, the week, I think the 24th, the week before that, I had scheduled a game. Work got crazy getting ready for the work vortex that was coming. And I might have been able to make it, but I was stressed and exhausted and my brain wasn't working, and I just didn't want to. That wasn't fair to my players to show up, and maybe I would have run a good game, but I felt like I would have run a pretty poor game. So I just said, "Hey guys, I'm sorry I can't make it tonight." And then luckily I was able to circle back in on November 14th and take back up. So I missed 3 weeks, but by the time everything was, between DMing, making a video, it's been like almost a month or longer since one of these videos has come out. So, I apologize if you're like, where out in the abyss with Shane? I mean, most people are like, who cares? But I'm sure there's a few people out there that were like, hey, where's it at? And Rob, I appreciate you checking on me. So, and we will, even with it being Thanksgiving week this coming week, we're still planning on playing on that Tuesday night. So, and then my cat just came in, just opened the door and came right in. There he is. You can kind of see him right there. Hey, Buster. So anyway, that was the delay, and that's also the end of, and now my cat sneezed. I don't know if you can hear that or not. And that's also the end of viewer feedback and now they're hissing at each other. I don't know. Cats, what are you going to do? Despite their craziness, my life is better with them in it. So I don't know. All right. So that's it for viewer feedback. So I'm going to take off my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback, and we will move right in to recapping last session. So here we go. So this session, we're going to spend some time in Chapter 10 again, which is Descent into the Depths. And that goes into how to organize your expedition. Also, what traveling in the Underdark is like on this leg of the adventure, random encounter-wise, that sort of thing. It also goes into building outposts, which is a downtime activity that we'll talk about a little bit in this video, and just a lot of other stuff. So again, I've pointed this out before, the organization of this adventure is lacking in this area, because Chapter 10 has all the information on doing your expedition, how to organize your expedition, and all those NPCs. Whereas Chapter 9 is Mantle Dareth, and you're supposed to have your expedition all organized and ready to go to Mantle Dareth. And then according to the layout of the book, you leave Mantle Dareth, and then there's all the information on how to do your expedition and all that. So, which is a little bit weird to me, and other people have pointed out that that's a little odd as well. So, but anyway, having said that, we're back to Chapter 10. The last episode, whatever you want to call it, session, the characters had wrapped up Mantle Dareth. They didn't do everything in Mantle Dareth, but they hit the major, adventure points. They got the ring that has the compass in it that'll lead them to Gravenhollow, from Gazrum Dulak, who's the leader of the Zentarum in Mantle Dareth. They're going to Gravenhollow, which is like the library of the stone giants, to see if they can find any information at all that would be helpful dealing with this demon lord incursion madness stuff that's going on in the Underdark. And that's what King Bruiner asked them to do. So the whole point of going to Mantle Dareth was hook up with Gazrum Dulak so you can get the ring has basically a compass in it that will always point to the safest. It has to be the shortest and the safest way to Gravenhollow. So, but before we get to Gravenhollow, I thought it would be fun to have another session of adventuring through the Underdark. Now, there's so much Underdark travel in Out of the Abyss. I don't think you want to do this too much or too often. I mean, you could literally, if you went by the rules and travel times and random encounters and all that, you could have session after session after session of travel time in between the major areas of Out of the Abyss and the major plot points. I don't recommend that. But, if you want to, go right ahead. But every now and then what I do, is I will have a travel session. And I thought that would be fun because I'd been gone for a little while. We hadn't played the adventure for a while. And I thought it'd be fun to kind of ease us back in with an Underdark travel session. Plus, I had a couple of ideas how to make it even more fun. I wanted to do some of the expedition stuff. And I wanted to do some of the random encounters. And I also had an encounter thought up that I thought would be pretty fun. And I wanted to play around with challenging the party, because again, I have 7 party members. They're all, I think, level 6 right now, even though by the book, I think they're supposed to be level 7, but they're doing really well. I mean, even though they haven't really intentionally worked on party balance, I mean, they just rock encounters. I mean, combat encounters. You got a couple of monks, and you got, a dwarven warrior that's got, Whelm the hammer from White Plume Mountain, and then you've got the warlocks running around with Wave the trident, and you've got one of the monks with, the sun sword that you get in this adventure. I think Dawnbringer. You get a cleric. A rogue thief, a bard. I don't know. It just all works together. Warlock. Even though one of the things I've told them is, when they roll up no characters, a lot of times they just this is a great party, good group of players, but the one thing that I feel they're a little lacking in, as far as the overall D&D experience, in a group, is anytime a new character is rolled up, or whether we're starting something new, or if it's to replace a character that died or left or something like that, they tend to just say, well, I'm just going to play, this is what I want to play, so I'm going to play that, regardless of if that's what the group needs or not. And I've pointed out a couple of times to them, and I always, hey, you can play however you want, but remember, you're in a group, and you're not playing by yourself in a vacuum, so and it'd be good to think, hey, what does the group need, rather than just, well, I've always wanted to play a left-handed bucktooth, metrosexual dentist from Miami. I thought that'd be fun. I'm just gonna throw that into the game, and then you're like, well, okay, I mean, you can do that, but it doesn't really help the party. However, the way it all comes together, they have just been rocking combat encounters for months. So I keep tinkering around trying to challenge them. So I'll talk about that a little bit more here in the video, where I used an encounter calculator for the final encounter of the session to try to challenge them, and what I learned from that, to keep attempting to challenge them. So anyway, that's kind of my reasoning why I went back into a travel session. Now, in a previous video, it's been several videos back, we went into chapter 10 and I talked about the expedition makeup. So I'm not how to handle the expedition, and a lieutenant, and scouts and rear guard and all this other stuff. So I'm not going to go into that again, but I will say that if you're curious about how to handle the expedition, chapter 10 has notes on that. And I would also again refer to Elven Tower. They have excellent notes on how to handle the expedition, because you got like 20 something plus NPCs, plus the party members. So it can get a little crazy. Now, what I've done, I think I've shown this before, I just made a list of all the NPCs that they had with them. And I've actually posted this over in the that Facebook group I mentioned, the Out of the Abyss DMs Facebook group, or it's something, just search for Out of the Abyss DMs and you'll find it. And it's got the different factions and who is within each faction, what their name is, and what like their class is, or whatever, what their role is. And then I've also got notes you'll see here on the side as to how they've done like their rear guard and their scouts, and how often scouts are moving back and forth and reporting, and etc. And actually, I've had to make notes here and change things as they've adapted how they're doing things. And then if an NPC dies or whatever, I line through it, so I can look on here and say, well, certain NPCs are gone. So this is really handy, and I gave the party their own copy, not written on, just with a list of everything. Said, here's yours, and that that came out last week. That thing came back out, for them to make their own notes on. So one of the things I did, like I said, I spent some time focusing on the expedition, and I mentioned, because one of the decisions they had made previously was, instead of, because you got the Lord's Alliance, you got the Emerald Enclave, you got the Order of the Gauntlet, you got the Zentarum. Of course, you have Eldith, who came and who's their lieutenant. So you've got all these different factions who don't necessarily always like each other or work well with each other or trust each other. Some do, some don't. And they had decided for like their scouting force that is, they had said 30 minutes ahead. They've adjusted back to 15 minutes ahead after events of this past session. And then you've got your rear guard, that's kind of protecting against stuff trying to sneak up from behind or whatever. And they had specifically, purposefully decided to make those groups up of representatives of the different factions. Which I didn't say don't do that. I did mention while they were doing everything that, these factions don't necessarily always get along. But I think they were trying to foster, teamwork, or trying not to offend anybody by certain factions being included. And I didn't really make a big deal out of that on the way to Mantle Dareth, but once they left Mantle Dareth, I mentioned almost right off, I said both of your groups, there's a lot of bickering. It hasn't really been a problem yet, but there's, when you're mixing these different factions and they're out there on the same team doing something, there's a lot of bickering, and you can see that and hear about that. And, it's, and I just threw that out there. And so they decided to reorganize, which I thought was smart. And because eventually I may have played off that, that I may have had some kind of encounter or some sort of role-playing thing happen if they hadn't. Or I may even said, hey, if you stuck with it and you provided leadership and they're getting along better now. You never know. But they decided to reorganize, and what they did was they changed the scout force so it's all Emerald Enclaves. It's one mounted dwarf scout from the Emerald Enclave, and then 2 spies from the Lord's Alliance. Yeah, from the Lord's Alliance, because the Lord's Alliance and the Emerald Enclave get along pretty well. And then the rear guard, they put 5 Lord's Alliance guards, and they put 1 spy as a runner. And they also had them move within bowshot range after certain stuff happened in this past session. And then they had the Order of the Gauntlet ended up becoming basically their honor guard. They had the Order of the Gauntlets kind of like always surrounding the main NPCs. They're their honor guard, and the Order of the Gauntlet is taking that very seriously. And then the Zentarum are basically in the Zentarum already have kind of a bad attitude anyway. They're only there because they were told they had to be there. So they're more worried about their superiors being angry at them than anything else. So they're just kind of a force, the part of the main traveling force, for protection and that sort of thing. So that's how they reorganized. And I'm playing it like the Order of the Gauntlet. They're taking that honor guard thing very seriously. Like, like even if they're like, hey, we're going to go up here and scout ahead, y'all stay back. Like, they won't. They'll go with them to protect them. So that was kind of fun. A little bit of role playing to kind of, I don't know. It was just fun. It was fun and it was fun the first time several weeks ago when we were setting up the expedition. So the expedition and all the NPCs and everything, when I first started reading about it, I was like, this is going to be a drag, man. I don't want to deal with it. I really don't want to deal with this. I consider just getting rid of the whole expedition NPC thing altogether. But after reading several websites, including Elven Tower and others who I've mentioned and linked to before in other videos, I was like, oh, maybe I can make this work. And now it's kind of fun. Some of the NPCs have started coming into their own. Like when they were in Mantle Dareth, a couple of the Zentarum, kind of came into their own. And, I've got asterisks by who the unofficial leader of each group is, of each faction, because in any group, there's always somebody who kind of, whether they're the leader or not, they kind of become the leader, kind of, or at least the person that everybody, kind of lets talk for them or whatever. So kind of started having some fun with that. And I thought that was nice because I didn't know, the players didn't know what I was going to do after being gone for several weeks. And, I could have launched them right into some super heavy stuff, but I was like, I kind of headed off with some role playing and got back into the Underdark and we get into the beauty and the danger, and took some time to discuss what it's like to travel in the Underdark. It can be very hostile and ugly, but it can also be incredibly beautiful, maybe even deadly beauty. So there's sights that take your breath away, and it's not just one homogeneous, like, boring cave. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on in the Underdark, all kinds of different flora and fauna and formations and crystals and all this stuff. So another thing, that I told them that the foraging and all of that, I said you were given enough supplies when you left Gracklestug. Was it Gracklestug? Gauntlgrim, King Bruiner's castle underground, basically. I always get Gauntlgrim and Gracklestug confused. Gracklestug is the Grey Dwarves. Gauntlgrim is the surface dwarves, under King Bruiner. They were given enough provisions so that they were extremely well provisioned. And you got the lizards, and you got people carrying stuff, and etc. And then between that, you got Eldith, and we have scouts, we have people in the party that have survival. And then, you've got literal scouts in the NPCs and all that. So I said the foraging is going well enough as you go along that you're not really in danger of running out of food. So I'm not making them keep up with rations and water and all that. I say occasionally you'll come across streams or lakes, or you'll come across those there's like a barrel kind of fungus in the Underdark that has like a gallon of water in it. So, they're doing okay with their food. I've just dispensed with them having to forage and find food. But, something can come up, a random encounter or a game element or something, role play, something could happen to change that. But for right now, I'm not making them mess with that aspect. So another thing I think it's important to point out is, given the nature of the madness in the Underdark, 2 of the players have indefinite madness right now after the encounter with the I can't remember right off the top of my head, but it was the demon lord that was in that gym at Mantle Dareth. They both developed an indefinite madness specific to that demon. It's like Farah's, I'd have to look it up. But anyway, and so one of them occasionally has daydreams that are so vivid they're hard to distinguish from reality, and the other one will occasionally go into a catatonic state. So, what I've done is I've decided I'm just going to randomly every now and then roll on one of those 2 characters when I remember to, or if I think it's a fun time to see if this could happen, and to see if they're madness triggers. And I can't remember what, maybe I was like 50% chance. I can't remember but I rolled. And one, the character that goes catatonic, I didn't roll for this time, but the other character that has the daydreams, I did roll, and they did have the daydreams just before a big fight. And instead of saying, describing, here's what, I kind of gave an idea of what the daydream might be, like they were leading, legions of penitent armies into battle or something along that line. But anyway, I said basically you're at disadvantage on like everything until you're no longer daydreaming. I said if it was a physical saving throw, like, are you doing a saving throw on like your constitution or something like that, then yeah, it does, it'll be a normal saving throw. But like everything else, attacking, dexterity, this or that and the other, it's all going to be at disadvantage because you're kind of lost in this daydream, and you're not at your best, and you kind of know you're daydreaming, but you kind of don't, and you're seeing, what am I exactly looking at here? Is this reality? Is it not? So kind of had a little bit of fun with that, and I just figured that's easy. Just you're at disadvantage while you're daydreaming, especially in a fight. So we did that. And then the other reason I want to point that out is they have a cleric in the party, but the cleric cannot cast Greater Restoration. So you need at least Greater Restoration, maybe Remove Curse, I can't remember. You definitely need Greater Restoration or something equivalent of that nature to remove a madness. And that's in the DM's guide, I think chapter 5 maybe, goes into madnesses and hazards of adventuring that goes into what you need to cure madness. And the party doesn't have anything that can do that. So when they left Mantle Dareth, not only could they not cure anybody, including Yantha Coaxrock, who, by the way, is still compelled to lie. Nobody realizes that yet, or the party didn't pick up on that. She lies even if it would be to her own benefit. That was the madness that Yantha, the NPC Sverfneblum had contracted that they saved. But none of the characters or the NPCs that were in Mantle Dareth that had madness, the party couldn't help them, and they can't help themselves with the two people in the party that are crazy right now that have this indefinite madness. And so just keep that in mind. You need greater restoration or something along those lines to take care of that. And I don't even think that's probably one of the reasons why they wanted characters to be 7th level at this point. Because if I remember right, the character or the player that has the cleric was like, I don't even think I can learn greater restoration yet. So maybe they need to be 7th level to do that. Anyway, that's just kind of a side thought. I don't even know if that would hold up if I went and researched it. So the other thing that, I was like, the book doesn't really say, because there's a map at the beginning in chapter 2 that lists all the distances and where's everything at, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, when they left Mantle Dareth to go to Gravenhollow and they're following this ring, how far away is Gravenhollow from Mantle Dareth? So I went to chapter 2 and looked it up, and chapter 2's it's got that big map of the Underdark, and then it's got the travel times between areas here, and kind of talks about travel pace in the Underdark, all this. According to this, Mantle Dareth and Gravenhollow is almost due west of Mantle Dareth, and it's northeast of Gauntlgrim. So that's how you can find it. But I counted out, it's 14 hexes. And each hex on here is 24 miles. And so I added that up. That's 336 miles. And at a normal travel pace in the Underdark, that's 6 miles a day. So it's 56 days. If you're not teleporting or something, some kind of rapid movement that they've got to deal with in this traveling. And I'm just assuming the expedition moves at a normal pace. Of course, remember that you have adjusted travel paces if you're in the Underdark on page 118, and then of course the map I'm referring to here is on page 19 in chapter 2 of the Out of the Abyss book. So that's 56 days of traveling, which I basically, for the most part, montaged for this travel session. But I did roll some random encounters, and then I did wrap it up with an encounter that's not in the book. It was like a purposeful random encounter, if you will, that I also wanted to introduce this concept of building an outpost, which is a downtime activity listed on page 147 in chapter 10, which we will get to, before the end of the video, because I kind of introduced it, towards the end. Some other stuff I want to mention before then. I did do some random encounters and some encounters, and random encounters and some encounters. I don't know. I did some encounters that were basically random encounters. On page 145, the reason that I recommend you go back to chapter 10 and revisit it is because there's a whole different set of random encounters that are not the random encounters from chapter 2, because chapter 2 is a travel chapter for Out of the Abyss as well, and it has its own random encounters. But no, this is different. This is specific to while you're like in the expedition and all that. So another thing that chapter 10 has in it that I recommend that you look at is there's this section starting on page 147 and going through 149 called Retracing Steps. And what this does is if the party for the first time goes to any of these areas or revisits after having visited them in the first chapter. Remember, we're in part 2 of Out of the Abyss now. In part 1, before they escaped, part 2 is after they came back in at the request of King Bruiner. Then if they go to Blending Stone, the Dark Lake, Gracklestug, Minzo Baranzan, which they probably wouldn't have gone to yet, Neverlight Grove, or even Velkenvelv, the area they were first, started the game in when they were kidnapped. And Sloop Bludop is included on the Dark Lake. Then you can get notes on what is going on there at this time in the adventure. So, they could go back and like, oh, here's what's going on now. Here's what's changed. Or they could, go there for the first time, and that's the state of things at that point. So that's kind of an interesting thing that they included. Now, the random encounters. Oh yeah, it says madness. For the rules on madness, what I was referring to earlier, it says see Chapter 2 of this adventure and Chapter 8 running the game in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So curing madness, all that. You want to refer basically to Chapter 8 in the Dungeon Master's Guide on how to cure it. For some reason I was thinking, is it Chapter 5 that's Dungeon Hazards, that has traps and all that? And anyway, I digress. So there's some cool random events. There's Battle Aftermath, Creature Encounter, Demon Encounter, Discipline Problem, Disease, Madness, Poisoned NPCs, Spoiled Supplies, and Vanishing NPCs. So go look at those. They're really neat. Now, a Demon Encounter could include, if you roll a 19 or a 20, so you roll a 20 for a random event, a D20. It says every other day of travel or camping in the Underdark, and this is on page 145, an event automatically occurs. I didn't do that because that had been 56, that had been 20 something events, 56 days of travel. So I didn't do that. But what I did do was I rolled a couple of times, or I think what I came up with, we had a vanishing NPCs. And the discipline problem, which is, I kind of introduced automatically at the beginning of the adventure. I said, you're having bickering and stuff like that, but it can actually get worse. It could get, the subcategories under discipline problem on page 146 here. You could have an argument that attracts monsters. You could have theft or a brawl. Now you could have demon encounters. And if they get the worst one, it could actually be Jewelblex, which is a demon lord. And it says if they stumble upon Jewelblex and flee immediately, the demon lord doesn't pursue or attack them. So, but you can also, you can find corpses, you can find scavengers that are feeding on the corpses, diseases can come up, madness can come up. And what that means basically is one of the NPC party members, the expedition members goes mad. You could have NPCs getting poisoned by eating tainted food or poisonous Underdark mushrooms or spoiled supplies. And if spoiled supplies happens, then I intend to, my group's going to have to forage some to replace that. Otherwise, they're going to be, they've lost some of their food. Now we did, and I loved this one. Had fun with this one. Vanishing NPCs. One or more NPC party members go missing and are never seen again. Just gone. Like Blair Witch gone, just disappeared out of the tent. Nobody knows where they went. Roll a d4 to determine how many NPCs vanish in this way. Efforts to find them or magically contact them turn up no trace. So what I had happen, I rolled this, and I think I either chose it or rolled it. If I rolled it, I was happy to get it because I think it's a cool random encounter. And then I rolled a d4, and I think I rolled 2, and I had 2 scouts. And I have, basically the way they had their scouting thing going was they had 2 scouts and a runner. So there's 2 scouts always ahead, and there's one running back and forth, checking in with the main group every 30 minutes. And during the scout came back and reported, then went back, and the two main scouts that weren't acting as were just gone. And so the scout came back very troubled, like, they're just gone. I can't find them. This doesn't make sense. Their tracks just disappear. So everyone's like, whoa, and everybody's getting all nervous. And so the main party moves ahead and leaves the rear guard and then Zentarum behind. Says, we'll be back, because they didn't want to bring everybody into danger if there's some kind of crazy danger. I love this kind of stuff because I know as a DM, it's over and done with. Nothing else is going to happen here. You had a couple of NPCs disappear and that's it. But the party doesn't know that. The players don't know that. So I love, this is one of my favorite parts of DMing, watching the player, because the suspense, the unknown, all of the possibilities, running through their head, and they're having to prepare for and defend and that kind of thing. But anyway, they get to where the scouts disappeared, and literally, I'm just like, you see the tracks, the scouts point out to you how to follow the tracks, and they're just gone. Gone. They just stop. Right in the middle of the trail, right in the middle of the tunnel. No signs of foul play, no blood, no belongings left behind. Lizards are gone, because they were on lizards. They were Emerald Enclave scouts on lizards. They're just gone. And so the part's like, what do we do? So they're looking for trap doors. They're searching the ceiling. They're looking around. They're detecting magic. They're using dark vision to look around. They're casting, some kind of light spells, dancing lights or whatever, looking all over the place, theorizing what could, using nature and arcana checks to theorize what could have happened. And they finally landed on the theory that something that could fly swooped in very suddenly and carried off the scouts and the lizards. That was their best theory. But now and it was interesting to watch all this work. But in their questions, they were asking nature checks, arcana checks, and one of the things I mentioned in the middle of all that, because they were, I roll nature. What do I know about the Underdark, and this kind of thing. And I'm like, well, that every now and then, sometimes people and creatures just disappear in the Underdark. And I mixed that in a bunch of other stuff, but they, one or two of the players, I think, okay, they're just gone. I think they got that, even though I wasn't trying to give them an overt hint. Not too strong anyway, because I was giving a lot of information and answers too. But I think they were thinking about demons. I think they finally assumed like demons, because they had seen flying demons at their escape from Velkenvelve. That was the thing that triggered off, and they're escaping. And also just the cleric, the consulting religion and all that. Yeah, there's demons who could have flown in and ran off and just escaped with them. So they kind of relaxed a little bit, which I wasn't anticipating. I figured they would think this was a major thing going on with that night's adventure, but they kind of relaxed a little bit, and I role played it like, the expedition NPCs are, that night at the camp, the conversation's a little forced. There's a little nervousness, a little uncomfortableness, because it's weird what happened. But anyway, so that was a lot of fun, playing with the vanishing NPCs. And like I said, there's some other really cool encounters, random encounters and stuff you can do in this part of Out of the Abyss. Now, another thing that came up on this session was, I mentioned that there's a lot of encounters happening, random encounters, a lot of this and that. I said, but your expedition is handling it, right? Like the scouts or the rear guard or, all the people kind of with the main, they're handling it. So we found a carrion crawler, or we got fire beetles, or, hey, this area looks kind of unstable, or, any of that. The expedition's handling it. The stuff that in the first part of the adventure, the party would have had to handle every little random encounter that came up. I said the expedition's handling it. I said they basically expect you as the big gun heroes to get involved when it's something they can't handle. And it specifically mentions, I think in chapter 10, like if it's a demon encounter, the party needs to get involved in that. Like the expedition NPCs will be like, hey, you guys need to deal with that, kind of thing. So, I made that clear that, there's still stuff happening in the Underdark. There's still dangerous moments, but your expedition people are handling it. And then you're getting reports from Eldith or what, hey, this was handled today or this happened, but if crazy stuff comes up, then the party needs to get involved. So, which will lead into, the final encounter. Because during the final encounter, and I had mentioned before, like in Mantle Dareth and other stuff, I said, your NPCs and stuff are not just going to jump into a fight. We're going to assume that most combat stuff is party only. I'm not just going to volunteer the NPCs in to the party fight, right? Because that's a lot of NPCs. They're basically marching with a very small army. So, but one of the players, is like, they got into a big fight, big encounter at the end of the session, which I'll go into more detail here. And one of the players was like, why aren't the NPCs helping? And so I clarified. I said, hey, they handle like the light work, the off-camera work, but when it's a big encounter, something really tough, they expect you to come in. And I said the narrative reasons for that again are, they're kind of the rank and file. They're handling the more mundane stuff. But if it's something, that really requires some big guns, then you are expected to handle that. If you ask them to get involved, they will. But the way that things are, you're just kind of expected to be the ones to deal with that. So that's the narrative reason. The out of game reason, which I also gave, I said, well, I can have the NPCs get in the middle of your fights for you. And I said, if you request NPCs to get into the fights, I will bring the NPCs in and I'll run that part of it. I said, but remember, that's going to affect the amount of experience points you get, and it'll also affect, they're gonna want loot, and they're gonna want, whatever they want, spoils of victory from the fights if they're going to get involved. And again, it will also affect how much experience points you're getting, because if you bring a bunch of NPCs in, they have stats, they have basically levels, even though they're NPCs, and it will affect how much experience you're going to get. So that's kind of how I left it. And then, at first, I think the player was like, but then he was like, okay, I kind of get that. I mean, really what it comes down to is these kind of encounters, the heavy encounters, are meant for the players to have fun with and to be challenged by, not to sick their army of 25 NPCs on. And I guess if they insist on doing that, probably what I would have is NPCs dying fairly quickly, so they're using up their expedition as they move along for stuff that they probably could have handled themselves. But if you're DMing this, you DM it, to taste, handle it, how you want to handle it. But I think the important thing here is, to give the players a choice. If you want to use these NPCs, go right ahead. But there's downsides possible on the flip side of the advantages. So don't force the NPCs on them, but if they want to use them, don't say that they can't. That's kind of where I've landed. So I want to talk a little bit about Outpost building, which is a new downtime activity that is introduced in Out of the Abyss, and then I'll give out what the final encounter was before we wrap the session. Oh, one other thing I want to mention before I get into that: after the NPCs vanished, the scouts, one of the reasons why they felt comfortable moving forward in the same path, because there was a lot of discussion at this point. What do we do? We've got people vanishing, etc. But they consulted that ring from Gazrum Dulak that leads to Gravenhollow, and again, it's supposed to point to the route that is the shortest but also the safest. So you could have a shorter route that's more dangerous, and it won't point to that one. It'll point to the shortest and safest. Relative safety in the Underdark being a relative term. And it was still pointing straight forward. So that was another reason, like, okay, well, let's just move forward. However, let's talk about building outposts. This is a new downtime activity. And then, in 5th edition, there's downtime activities, what, characters can say they're doing during their downtime, and, they can work or make spells or make magical items. There's all these different downtime activities that they can do. So Out of the Abyss gives a new one. It's called Establish an Outpost. Now, again, this is where I think the organization of Out of the Abyss is a little weird. Because it says, you need to establish outposts, or it's recommended that the players establish outposts anytime they are more than 10 days travel away from Mantle Dareth. So when they left Gauntlgrim to go to Mantle Dareth, they went above ground for hundreds of miles, or at least 100 miles or something like that. Then when they went back down and traveled a whole lot longer underground. And they're going with ways they're intentionally not supposed to know this stuff. Like the Zentarum are guarding these routes, like, so that they won't know exactly how they got there or whatever. Or at least they're sworn to secrecy or something. So how do you establish an outpost before you get to Mantle Dareth? Especially when, Mantle Dareth, the chapter comes before chapter 10 that talks about how to travel and do stuff in the Underdark in the second part of Out of the Abyss. Now, I guess they assume that if you're a good DM, you're going to read everything in advance. And what I do is I kind of scan everything in advance and pay close particular attention to what I'm about to run that part of the adventure. Which has tripped me up a couple times, but for the most part it works pretty well, and with the amount of time I have in life, that's pretty much how I have to do it. So now, like, one of the purposes of the Outpost, and this is on page 147, allows scouts to easily backtrack to the Underdark, carrying messages and information to the character's allies. It also allows additional supplies and reinforcements to reach the expeditionary force with relative ease. Characters without outposts must rely on magic to send messages or receive supplies and reinforcements once their expeditionary force is more than 10 days travel away from Mantle Dareth. So if you hadn't already arranged for like some sort of teleportation, which none of the players can teleport at this point, or magical sending stones or something like that, and you didn't start establishing outposts till after you left Mantle Dareth, I mean, it's kind of weird to me. So, I mean, nice idea, but I think kind of half-baked as far as how it's presented here. But what I did do, because I wanted to introduce the idea of building an outpost, and I went ahead of a fun encounter. So the way we ended the session is, well, hold on. Let me go more into Outposts. Let me flesh this out a little bit more. Characters can clear out Underdark areas and create, and this is on page 147 again, or create defensible outposts where they and their followers can store supplies and take refuge. To ensure that an outpost isn't overrun and looted, guards must be assigned to the outpost while the characters are away. That's an important point. If you establish an outpost in the Underdark, you've got to leave some of your force behind to move forward. Outposts, I don't know how much. I'm thinking at least 2 or 3 people need to be left behind if you want to man that outpost. Since you've only got 25 to start with, and they've already lost a couple. I don't know. Outposts not only allow scouts to easily backtrack to the Underdark, carrying messages. Okay, we've already talked about that. 10 days away from Mantle Dareth. Okay. New downtime activity. Establish an outpost. Establishing an Underdark outpost is a new downtime activity available to characters in this adventure. An outpost requires a total of 150 hours of work to build, assuming its location is clear of creatures and hazards. Multiple characters can combine their efforts to reduce the completion time. Each Underdark outpost is basically a fortified encampment. It can take one of the following forms: a small cave, roughly 20 feet square, with one or more gated or barricaded exits, a walled compound up to 20 feet square within a much larger cavern, an island with boats or rafts, or a hard-to-reach ledge, pinnacle, or promontory accessed by ladders and or ropes. So there you go. Now, at this point in the adventure, they still have 20-something NPCs So I'm like, the 150 hours worth of work is not that big of a deal. You got a lot of people pitching in. You're going to knock that out really quick. So I'm not even making that a game element at this point. And I told my players that. I was like, at this point, that's trivial. You know, you guys could build an outpost fairly quickly with that many people, assuming you have the right place. So what I decided to do for this session was to combine, one, I wanted to have a fun travel session to kind of get into these new travel rules for part 2 of Out of the Abyss, other than the expedition stuff, which we'd already done previously. And also to give them the introduction to the outpost concept. So what I had planned already was I was going to have an encounter where the party was going to run across some Underdark creatures in an area that would make a great outpost. And in fact, those creatures were kind of using it like an outpost. And I just invented this Underdark feature, which you're free to use if you like it, that is like, what did I say, 40 feet in diameter, not radius, but it's kind of a spherical formation in the tunnel surface, the floor of the tunnel. It's roughly circular, about 40-foot diameter, and it has walls that are kind of leaning in. So from a distance, it would look, sorry about that, it would look almost like a mound, like kind of a flat mound with kind of inclined sides. But if you got up closer and climbed up the sloping wall and looked down in there, it's like a crater kind of, with these walls, these sloped walls that are leaning inwards from the inside, that are about 10 feet high or so, maybe 20 feet high. And Eldith explain, she starts talking to him about an outpost after they leave, and I'm using Eldith as a great way to dump game info into the party. She's kind of guiding them. She helped them set up the expedition and all that good stuff. She's helping to scout. But she's like, we need to set up an outpost. And so I'm keeping my eye out for a good place to do that. And she explains why outposts are beneficial. And I'm thinking at this point of introducing the concept that Eldith has some sending stones that she brought from Gauntlgrim to allow them to stay in touch with Gauntlgrim, but also to start allowing Gauntlgrim to talk to Outpost and Outpost to talk to the party and vice versa and all that. I think I'm going to introduce that, because otherwise these outposts are kind of pointless unless let's run to the outpost. That's our next safe place. We got to get there. We got to backtrack. We got to retreat. So, anyway, and so I had them come across this, and Eldith was actually she's like, if this is what I think it is, this is great. I've actually been hoping we'd run across one of these, but I didn't think we would because they're kind of rare. And these features appear around the Underdark enough that people know about them, but they're relatively rare. But they make great spots to set up a defensible position. And they said they don't know what made them. They don't know if some creature in the past, with its movement made them, like, some kind of big worm popping up through the floor and it left something, behind that the lava hardened. I don't know. Or maybe like some big bubble in the lava popped and left. They don't know. They're sought out. The people like them in the Underdark to find these, especially if you need to set up stuff like outposts or whatever. And in fact, when they encounter it, there is creatures that have set it up as they think of it as their castle, but it's basically an outpost, a defensible position in the Underdark. So they're in this big cavern, and in the cavern is this, from a distance, kind of looks like a mound with kind of a flat top. But in reality, one of these like craters with kind of inclined wall around it. So long story short, they come across it, and there was I used, and I want to talk about this. I started getting more and more into encounter calculation by challenge rating, because my group really almost always makes short work of challenging encounters I throw with them, and anybody that gets dropped, usually there's enough people healing them to keep, even if they'll heal them, get them on his feet, and they'll get dropped again, because it's very difficult combat wise, I guess, unless I wanted to drop something really heavy on them, like an ancient red dragon or something like that, or a demi an arch lich, demi lich, or whatever. Unless I want to drop something really, really super heavy on them, they fight pretty well, and I'm like, I want to challenge them. I don't want to cheat and beat them, and I don't want to be unfair to them, but I want to challenge them and make sure they have a challenging fight. So I keep tinkering. And so what I did with this one is I found, I went and looked at the encounter calculators online, and I ended up using, it's called Kobold Fight Club. I've seen it before, but if you're not familiar with it, it's called Kobold Fight Club, and it's at kobold.club. Just search for Kobold Fight Club, and I'll try to put a screenshot or something up, but it's a really good tool for building encounters. You can say, hey, I got this many players or this many characters, they're at this level. And then it's got good search tools for picking NPCs and monsters of various types by their challenge rating and their type, their size, where you would find them, what rule book they're from, monster manual or whatever. And you can build encounters, and you can build an encounter that is easy or medium or hard or deadly. So I intentionally created a deadly encounter for this party because I know based on experience that they handle this stuff pretty well. Stuff that should mess them up, they do pretty well at. So I ended up doing a deadly encounter. I played with a lot of different stuff. I almost did like a white dragon that was under madness and thought it was in a frosty area with some kobolds. I almost did that, but I ended up doing a mind flayer arcanist, which is even more nasty than a mind flayer, and 2 driders. And that ended up being for a group of 7 players at 6th level, that was a deadly encounter. And as I expected, although a player went down a couple of times but was healed back up, as I expected, they handled it pretty well. Now there was a couple of crazy moments, and there was a moment where the mind flayer was trying to attach its tentacles onto a monk, and if it had done that the next round, it could, if it grappled that way, it could possibly yank his brain out and eat it, which is crazy. But anyway, it didn't come to that. But it was the mind flayer attempted it. But I came up with this scenario where the mind flayer arcanist, of course, was crazy in the Underdark, named him Hermastocles the All-Crushing, and he was building an army. He was trying to find disaffected entities and creatures within the Underdark to build an army to conquer the Underdark. And his first 2 recruits were these 2 driders, which, if you don't know, a drider is kind of like, think of a centaur, but instead of the horse bottom, it's a spider bottom, and instead of a person top, it's a drow top. And driders are made when Lolth, the Dark Elves goddess, is upset with the Dark Elf, she turns them into a drider. So he's got these 2 driders, and he has his castle in this circular crater formation thing, and he's telepathic, and he's, go away, leave or be destroyed. And so of course the party fights. There's a nice big fight. And when it got to, hey, we're fighting a mind flayer and a couple of driders, that's when the one player was like, do the NPCs help? And that's where I kind of explained their options. And he was like, okay, well, I get that. I think we want to have the NPCs help. But we had fun with it, and I mean that, it could have potentially been deadly for somebody, but as I expected, it wasn't. Although the player or the party did use up all of its main healing spells from the cleric, keeping the warlock alive, because the warlock cast oh, I can't remember. There's some warlock spell where it puts darkness with creepy tentacles and whispers of Hadar, horror of Hadar, or something like that, right into the crater before they knew it was in there, and that really upset the mind flayer. So the mind flayer wanted to kill the warlock. So the driders were on the warlock, and the mind flayers throwing like lightning bolts and stuff at the warlock. And then the monks confronted there's two monks confronted the mind flayer directly, and that's when the mind flayer thought, well, I'm going to eat your brain and all that. But anyway, good fight. But they survived it relatively easy, but they burned through, a lot of cleric spells, and some monk key. Is it key? Yeah. Monk key points winning fight. And so I'm thinking, okay, so how do I challenge them? And next time I need to either have more opponents. Remember, this is already a deadly encounter for them, but they survived it fairly easily. So I need to either up the amount of opponents in that fight, or I need to do waves or something. Like, oh, good thing that's done. Like they think all they're dealing with is a Mind Flayer Arcanist and two Driders, and they get through that like, whew, good, you used up the last of the healing spells. And I mean, they've got healing potions and stuff on them too. And then boom, here come like, another Mind Flayer who was kind of junior to the Arcanist, and some more Driders, or whatever, the new recruits. And they're like, oh no, and I was talking Morris from Ian World. Me and him and I think Sly Flourish were kind of tweeting a little bit on Twitter the other day, and this kind of came up, not because I was talking about it, but like how to challenge players or certain groups or whatever in ways. And and I mentioned groups that blow off everything immediately, and he called those Nova Burst parties. And I like that thought, because he's talking about the Human Torch from Fantastic Four, and the comics would go Nova, and it was this amazing blast of power. But after that, like his flame would go out, and he would just start falling because he's out of power, he's out of gas. He may even fall unconscious. I can't remember. So you got these parties that will blast everything, and then they got nothing left because they're like, well, we'll short rest, or we'll long rest, or hey, we got the NPCs here or whatever. So I think next time I craft a custom encounter to challenge them, I'm going to do at least 2 waves. So they think they're dealing with this, they wipe that wave out, and they've used up a lot of their gas already, and then here comes the second wave. Again, I'm not out to purposefully kill any characters, but I want to challenge them, so that they will, I want them to be even more strategic and use tactics amongst, they've gotten really good, but I want to keep challenging them. And that too, so that, they are a little more cautious in how they do things. Cause they've racked some stuff up. But again, I want the challenge level to be fun, not frustrating. And that can be a, pretty hard line to walk. So, but yeah, this, here I'm looking at Kobold Fight Club, and it was a Drider, 2 Driders, which is CR6, a Mind Flayer Arcanist, which is CR8, and according to Kobold Fight Club, that would be a deadly difficulty. The normal XP would be looks like 8,500, and the adjusted XP is 12,750 XP points. So I guess they have a way of saying, this mix of creatures together, here's the adjusted XP for everything. This is how tough this really is. So anyway, that's basically it for this session. Again, looking forward to getting back on a weekly update with you. I hope you enjoy the videos. The viewing for the last video was a little down compared to what it normally is, but not enough for me to go, oh, I'm not going to keep doing these. But yeah, if you please, if you think this is a good resource for somebody, share the word, spread the word. Please leave me a thumbs up and a comment on YouTube if you can. That helps me out a lot. Believe it or not, that's really important to YouTube, because they view that as interactions, and the stuff that gets more interactions they assume is more interesting to the viewers. So I'll get highlighted more, and then more people get benefited, and it's just a circle. It's a happy little circle for everybody. I'm going to just check my notes one more time, make sure that we didn't miss anything. But I think I've told you everything that I was going to tell you. And next session, I'm just going to arrive them at Gravenhollow. I had told them right before they found that formation that they want to turn into an outpost that you're really close to Gravenhollow, you feel. And so next session, I'm just going to get them there. And we'll talk at the beginning about, do you want to man the outpost? Do you want to leave people behind? If not, it's kind of a pointless exercise to create outposts. And I'll probably go ahead and introduce some sort of sending stone mechanic or something like that. I'll say it's kind of, you've been doing that. I just hadn't mentioned, y'all can communicate with, Gauntlegrim if you need to or whatever. And that's also, I really want to do this for replacement characters, because we specifically said extra characters from the Vanguard of the Eye, which is their guild, came and are kind of hanging around Gauntlegrim in case they need to provide support. So if a character leaves or dies, that's how we're going to replace that character for that player. So I want to have that line of communication to Gauntlegrim so that it makes narrative sense, right? I mean, I could say, okay, they're there, but it's better for storytelling and willing suspension of disbelief and all to explain how. Why do you suddenly have a replacement? So we'll do that. And that's where we'll pick up next video. So next video, we will be talking about Gravenhollow as they try to move things forward, for the overall plot of Out of the Abyss. Thanks so much for watching again. I appreciate any comments or thumbs up. But regardless, I just hope you have a great week until we do this again. And thanks so much for watching. We will catch you next time on Shameplays.